She was a billionaire CEO who built an empire from nothing. He was just a janitor with calloused hands and a past buried in silence. But when she stood on the rooftop helipad of her glass tower and joked, "Pilot that helicopter and I'll marry you," she never imagined he would walk straight to the cockpit and prove her wrong. What happened next shattered everything she thought she knew about power, identity, and the broken man who mopped her floors at midnight. This isn't just a story about flying. It's about the secrets we carry, the lives we rebuild in the shadows, and the second chances that arrive when we've stopped asking for them. What follows will remind you that heroes don't always wear suits, and sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places. Before we begin, if stories of resilience, shocking truths, and unforgettable transformations move you, consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. We share journeys that lift the spirit and prove that courage and redemption still matter. Let's begin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The skyline of Crescent Bay shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a forest of glass and steel towers piercing the Pacific haze. At the very top of the tallest building, the Horizon Dynamics headquarters rose like a blade of polished obsidian, its mirrored surface reflecting clouds that drifted lazily overhead. On the rooftop helipad, 63 floors above the streets below, the air tasted of salt and jet fuel. Orlith Danavar stood at the edge of the landing circle, her heels clicking against the painted concrete as she paced. She wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, her dark hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail that whipped slightly in the wind. Around her, a dozen executives and assistants hovered nervously, tablets glowing, phones buzzing, voices low and urgent. The helicopter sat idle in the center of the pad. A sleek black Bell 429 with the Horizon Dynamics logo emblazoned across its tail. Its rotors gleamed under the sun, motionless, silent, useless. "Where is he?" Orlith's voice cut through the murmur like a scalpel. Her assistant, a young woman named Priya, looked up from her tablet, eyes wide with panic. "Miss Danavar, Captain Reeves is still stuck in traffic on the bridge. The accident has the entire southbound lane shut down. He says he's at least 40 minutes out." Orlith's jaw tightened. 40 minutes. She glanced at her watch, a platinum piece that had cost more than most people's cars. In 20 minutes, a convoy of international investors would arrive at the downtown convention center, expecting her to make a grand entrance from the sky. This wasn't just transportation. It was theater. It was power. And right now, it was slipping through her fingers. "Find me another pilot," she said sharply. "I don't care if you have to pull someone out of a flight school. We are not driving to this meeting." Priya's fingers flew across her screen. "Ma'am, I've contacted every charter service in the city. Everyone certified on a 429 is either booked or out of range. We could push the meeting back by an hour." "No." Orlith's eyes flashed. "I built this company by showing up when others couldn't. I'm not about to start making excuses now." A murmur rippled through the group. One of the junior executives whispered to another, something about calling the mayor's office, maybe borrowing a police pilot. Orlith ignored them. She turned toward the helicopter, studying it as if sheer willpower could make it fly. The rooftop door swung open with a soft metallic groan. No one noticed at first. The man who stepped through moved quietly, almost invisibly. He wore a gray maintenance jumpsuit with the Horizon Dynamics cleaning crew logo stitched onto the chest pocket. A mop bucket on wheels squeaked softly as he pushed it toward the service corner of the helipad. His name was Elliot Carter, though no one here knew much about him beyond that. He was the night janitor, the guy who emptied the trash bins on the executive floors, who scrubbed the marble lobbies after everyone went home, who replaced the paper towels in the restrooms without a word. He kept his head down, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with faint scars that no one ever asked about. Elliot had been working at Horizon Dynamics for 8 months. In that time, he'd spoken maybe a dozen sentences to anyone. He arrived at 10 p.m., worked until 6 a.m., and left before the morning crowd flooded in. He was invisible by design, but today, he'd been called up early. A spill on the 59th floor, someone said. Coffee and glass everywhere. He'd cleaned it, mopped the hallway, and was about to leave when he heard the commotion on the roof. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled him toward the door. Now he stood at the edge of the group, unnoticed, watching. Orlith was still pacing, her frustration palpable. "This is absurd," she muttered. "We have a $20 million helicopter sitting here, and no one to fly it." One of the older executives, a man named Gregory, with silver hair and expensive cufflinks, chuckled nervously. "Well, unless you've got a pilot's license hidden somewhere, Miss Danavar, I think we're out of options." She shot him a look that could freeze steel. "I don't joke about logistics, Gregory." Elliot's eyes drifted to the helicopter. He knew that model. Knew it better than most people knew their own cars. The Bell 429 was smooth, responsive, reliable in bad weather. He'd flown one just like it years ago, back when his life looked nothing like this. Back when people called him by a different name. He should have walked away. Should have pushed his mop bucket back through the door and disappeared into the stairwell like he always did. But something held him in place. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught the rotor blades. Maybe it was the memory of what it felt like to sit in that cockpit, hands on the controls, the world falling away beneath him. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. "I can fly it." The words came out quiet, steady, but in the silence that followed, they might as well have been shouted. Every head turned. Orlith stopped pacing. Priya looked up from her tablet. Gregory's eyebrows shot up so fast they nearly left his face. Elliot stood there, mop handle still in one gloved hand, face calm, expression unreadable. For a moment, no one said anything. Then someone laughed, a sharp, disbelieving bark of laughter that broke the tension like shattering glass. "Did the janitor just say he can fly a helicopter?" One of the junior executives whispered loudly. Another snorted. "Yeah, maybe he watched a YouTube tutorial on his lunch break." The laughter spread, rippling through the group like a wave. Even Gregory allowed himself a condescending smile, but Orlith didn't laugh. She studied Elliot with sharp, calculating eyes. There was something about him, something in the way he stood, the way he'd spoken, that didn't match the uniform or the mop. She took a step closer. "You're serious," she said. Not a question, a statement. Elliot met her gaze. "Yes, ma'am." "And where exactly did a janitor learn to fly a $20 million helicopter?" "I didn't learn as a janitor." Her eyes narrowed. "Then what were you before?" He hesitated. The past was a locked door he'd spent years keeping shut. But standing here, with the helicopter behind him, and the sky stretching endlessly above, he felt the lock start to turn. "I was a pilot," he said simply. "A long time ago." More laughter. Someone muttered something about fantasy novels. Priya whispered to Gregory, who shook his head, smirking. Orlith folded her arms. "A pilot? Of what? Crop dusters? Tourist flights over the bay?" "Search and rescue," Elliot said. "Offshore rigs. Mountain extraction. High-altitude transport." The laughter faltered. Just a little. Orlith tilted her head, intrigued now despite herself. "And why exactly are you mopping floors instead of flying?" Elliot's jaw tightened. "That's a longer story." "I don't have time for long stories," she said. But her tone had shifted. Less mocking. More curious. She glanced at the helicopter, then back at him. "Prove it." "Ma'am, you heard me. If you can really fly this thing, prove it. Get it in the air, bring it back down clean, and I'll personally write you a check for $50,000. She paused, a sly smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Hell, I'll even marry you." The rooftop erupted in laughter again, louder this time. Priya covered her mouth, giggling. Gregory slapped his knee. Even the helicopter mechanic standing by the maintenance shed cracked a grin. But Elliot didn't laugh. He just looked at Orlith, his expression calm, unshaken. "Then I'll hold you to your word, Miss Danavar," he said quietly. The laughter died. Something in his voice, in the steadiness of his gaze, sent a ripple of uncertainty through the crowd. Orlith's smile faded. For the first time since he'd spoken, she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Confidence, not arrogance, not bravado, just the quiet, unshakable certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of. Elliot set the mop down gently against the wall. He stripped off his work gloves, revealing hands that were calloused, strong, and steady. Then, without waiting for permission, he walked toward the helicopter. The crowd parted instinctively as Elliot approached the Bell 429. The laughter had faded into an uneasy silence, replaced by a low murmur of disbelief and curiosity. Even Orlith stood frozen, arms still crossed, watching him with a mixture of skepticism and something else she couldn't quite name. Elliot reached the helicopter and placed his hand on the cool metal of the fuselage. The touch was almost reverent, like greeting an old friend after years apart. His fingers traced the edge of the door, and for a moment, his eyes closed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was home. Or at least, it used to be. Behind him, Gregory cleared his throat loudly. "Miss Dainvar, surely you're not actually going to let this man touch a $20 million aircraft?" Orlith didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on Elliot. Priya stepped forward, tablet clutched to her chest. "Ma'am, if he damages it, insurance won't cover unauthorized operators. We could be liable for—" "I know what we could be liable for," Orlith interrupted, her voice sharp. "Let him try." "But," I said, "let him try." Priya fell silent. The rest of the executives exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared speak. Elliot opened the pilot's door and climbed inside. The cockpit smelled of leather and electronics, clean and modern. He settled into the seat, and immediately, the world outside seemed to fade. His hands found the controls instinctively, muscle memory guiding him before thought could catch up. He scanned the instrument panel. Altimeter, airspeed indicator, fuel gauge, hydraulic pressure. Everything was in perfect condition. Horizon dynamics didn't cut corners. His fingers moved across the switches with practiced ease. Battery on, fuel pump engaged. Avionics booting up, the screens flickered to life, casting a soft blue glow across his face. Outside, the crowd pressed closer, watching through the cockpit glass. Orlith stood at the front, her expression unreadable. "What's he doing?" someone whispered. "Running a pre-flight check," Priya said quietly, her skepticism beginning to crack. "That's actually the correct sequence." Gregory scoffed. "Anyone can flip switches. Doesn't mean he knows what they do." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Inside the cockpit, Elliot's hands moved with quiet precision. He adjusted the collective, tested the cyclic, checked the pedals. Everything responded smoothly. He reached up and flipped the starter switch. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. The sound was deafening, a deep, guttural roar that echoed across the rooftop, vibrating through the concrete beneath their feet. The rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, slicing through the air with a rhythmic whump 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 that drowned out every other sound. Wind exploded outward, whipping hair and ties, and suit jackets. Priya stumbled backward, shielding her face. Gregory grabbed his glasses before they flew off. Papers from someone's clipboard scattered across the helipad like startled birds. Orlith stood her ground, eyes wide, heart pounding. The downdraft tore at her ponytail, but she didn't move. She couldn't, because the helicopter was lifting. Slowly, gracefully, the Bell 429 rose into the air. Elliot's hands moved with fluid confidence, adjusting the collective with micro-precision, balancing the cyclic to keep the aircraft stable. The skids left the ground, inches at first, then feet. The crowd stood frozen, mouths open, eyes locked on the impossible sight before them. The janitor was flying. Elliot brought the helicopter up to a hover, 10 feet above the helipad. The rotors spun in perfect rhythm, the aircraft hanging in the air as steady as if it were bolted to the sky. He adjusted the tail rotor, pivoting the nose smoothly to face the sunset. From the cockpit, he could see the entire city spread out below him. Crescent Bay stretched to the horizon, buildings glowing gold in the late light, the ocean beyond shimmering like molten glass. For the first time in years, he felt whole. He closed his eyes and let himself breathe. Then, with a gentle touch on the cyclic, he guided the helicopter through a slow, controlled circle around the rooftop. Not showing off, just proving a point. The aircraft responded like an extension of his body, smooth and effortless. Below, the crowd watched in stunned silence. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Even Gregory had gone pale. Orlith's heart raced. She'd seen skilled pilots before. She'd flown with the best charter services money could buy. But this was different. This wasn't just competence. This was mastery. Who the hell was this man? Elliot completed the circle and brought the helicopter back to the center of the pad. He descended slowly, carefully, the skids touching down with barely a whisper. The engine's roar softened to a steady hum as he throttled down, and the rotors began to slow. By the time the blades stopped spinning, the rooftop was silent except for the wind. Elliot powered down the systems, ran through the post-flight checklist, and climbed out of the cockpit. His boots hit the concrete with a soft thud. He closed the door behind him, then turned to face the crowd. Every eye was on him. No one moved. No one spoke. He walked back toward Orlith, his expression calm, his hands steady. When he stopped in front of her, he met her gaze without flinching. "Clean enough for you, Miss Danvar?" he asked quietly. For a moment, she couldn't find her voice. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man in the janitor's uniform with the pilot who had just flown a multi-million-dollar helicopter like it was a natural extension of himself. Finally, she managed to speak. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" "Offshore platforms," Elliot said. "Alaska, North Sea, Gulf of Mexico, flew supply runs, medevac missions, storm rescues. Logged about 6,000 hours before I stopped." "Why did you stop?" His jaw tightened. "Like I said, that's a longer story." Orlith studied him, her sharp mind already working through the implications. This man wasn't just a pilot. He was an expert, and he was mopping her floors. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elliot Carter." "Well, Elliot Carter," she said slowly, a small smile playing at her lips. "It seems I owe you $50,000. The crowd stirred, murmuring in disbelief. Gregory looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Priya's mouth hung open. Elliot shook his head. "I don't want your money, Miss Danvar." She blinked. "Excuse me? I didn't do it for money. I did it because you needed a pilot. And because," he hesitated, his voice softening, "I needed to remember what it felt like." Orlith stared at him, speechless. No one turned down $50,000. Not in her world. "Then what do you want?" she asked. Elliot glanced back at the helicopter, then at her. "Nothing. Just to keep doing my job." Before she could respond, he walked past her, picked up his mop, and headed toward the rooftop door. "Wait." Orlith called after him. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "You're not getting off that easy," she said, her voice firm. "I don't know who you are or why you're here, but I'm going to find out. And in the meantime, you're flying me to that meeting." Elliot's eyes widened slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not insured to." "I don't care. You just proved you're the best pilot on this rooftop. Probably the best in the city. So get back in that cockpit, Mr. Carter, and take me where I need to go." For a moment, Elliot hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As he walked back toward the helicopter, Orlith turned to Priya. "Cancel Captain Reeves and pull Elliot Carter's employment file. I want to know everything about him by the time I get back." Priya nodded, still looking dazed. "Yes, Miss Danvar." Orlith climbed into the passenger seat, her mind racing. She'd built an empire by reading people, by seeing potential where others saw nothing. And right now, sitting next to this quiet janitor in the cockpit of her helicopter, She knew one thing with absolute certainty. Elliot Carter was hiding something. Something big. And she was going to find out what it was. The bell. 429. Lifted smoothly into the evening sky. The city of Crescent Bay spreading out beneath them like a glowing circuit board. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Inside the cockpit, the only sounds were the steady hum of the rotors and the soft beep of the navigation system. Orlith sat in the passenger seat, her hands gripping the armrests despite herself. She'd flown in helicopters dozens of times before, but never like this. Elliot's piloting was impossibly smooth, each movement deliberate and precise. There was no jerking, no sudden adjustments, just a seamless glide through the air, as if gravity itself had agreed to cooperate. She glanced at him. His face was calm, almost serene, his eyes scanning the horizon with practiced ease. This wasn't just skill, this was someone who had lived in the sky. "You fly like you've done this your whole life," she said, breaking the silence. Elliot's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Most of it, anyway." "How long?" 22 years. Started when I was 18. Orlith did the math. That made him around 40, but his file had listed him as 37. She filed that discrepancy away for later. "So what happened?" She pressed. "How does someone go from flying rescue missions to mopping floors?" Elliot's grip on the cyclic tightened almost imperceptibly. "Life happened." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now, Miss Danivar." She studied him, frustrated but intrigued. Most people crumbled under her scrutiny. Employees stammered. Business rivals deflected. But Elliot Carter just kept flying, his expression unreadable, his walls firmly in place. "Fine," she said, "but you should know I don't let mysteries go unsolved." "I figured as much." They flew in silence for a few minutes, the city passing below them. Orlith watched the streets, the buildings, the tiny cars creeping along like ants. From up here, her empire looked small, manageable. It was a perspective she rarely got. "Convention Center, East Landing Pad," Elliot said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. 2 minutes out. She nodded. "You've flown into that pad before?" "No. But I can see it on the nav screen, and I know the approach." "You make it sound easy." "It is, if you know what you're doing." There was no arrogance in his tone, just fact. Orlith found herself smiling despite everything. Confidence without ego was rare in her world. The convention center came into view, a sprawling complex of glass and steel on the waterfront. The rooftop helipad was marked with bright yellow paint, already illuminated by ground lights as dusk settled in. A small crowd had gathered below, waiting for her arrival. Elliot adjusted their descent angle, compensating for a crosswind that Orlith hadn't even noticed. The helicopter descended smoothly, the skids touching down so gently that she barely felt the impact. "We're here," he said simply. Orlith unbuckled her harness and stared at him. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Carter." "I try not to be." "Well, you're failing spectacularly." She climbed out, and immediately, her assistant on the ground rushed forward with a tablet and a flurry of updates. But Orlith held up a hand, silencing her, and turned back to the helicopter. Elliot was already going through the shutdown sequence, his hands moving across the controls with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown all along. "Wait here," she called up to him. "I'll need a ride back." He looked at her, surprised. "You're sure? You're the best pilot I've flown with in 10 years. Why wouldn't I be sure?" Before he could respond, she turned and strode toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the concrete. Her entourage scrambled to keep up. Inside the convention hall, the meeting went exactly as Orlith had planned. The investors were impressed. The contracts were signed. By the time she returned to the helipad an hour later, night had fully fallen, and the city lights sparkled like stars reflected in water. Elliot was still there, leaning against the helicopter, arms crossed, staring out at the bay. He looked up when he heard her approach. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Perfectly, thanks to you." He shrugged. "You would have managed without me." "Maybe, but not as dramatically." She climbed back into the passenger seat. "Take me home." "Where's home?" "Skyline Terrace, north end of the city. You'll see it, the gride.com, tallest residential tower on the coast." Elliot nodded and climbed back into the pilot's seat. Within minutes, they were airborne again, cutting through the night sky. This time, Orlith didn't stay silent. "I looked into your file while I was in the meeting," she said casually. Elliot's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "It's remarkably thin," she continued. "Hired 8 months ago. Previous employment listed as various maintenance and custodial positions. No references. No certifications. No pilot's license on record. I let mine lapse." "Why?" "Didn't need it anymore." "But you clearly still know how to fly. Better than most licensed pilots I've met. So why hide it?" Elliot was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because flying used to be my whole life. And then it wasn't. And starting over meant leaving that behind." "What changed?" He hesitated. "I lost someone. Someone important. And after that, I couldn't be that person anymore. The one who lived in the sky. So I came down. Stayed down." Orlith felt something shift in her chest. She recognized that tone. Grief. Loss. She'd built walls around her own past, and she knew the sound of someone else doing the same. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." They flew in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Less guarded, more human. When they reached Skyline Terrace, Elliot brought the helicopter down onto the private rooftop pad, with the same effortless grace he'd shown all evening. Orlith unbuckled and stepped out, then turned back to him. "What are you doing tomorrow night?" she asked. Elliot blinked. "Working, same as every night." "No, you're not. You're coming to a gala I'm hosting. Charity event. Black tie. Lots of rich people pretending to care about causes. Miss Danavar, I don't. It's not a request. Mr. Carter, you just saved my biggest deal of the year. The least you can do is let me thank you properly. I don't own a tux. I'll have one sent to your address." "What size are you?" Elliot sighed, realizing he wasn't going to win this argument. 42 long. "Done. 7 p.m. Don't be late." She started toward the rooftop door, then paused and looked back. "And Elliot, you don't have to hide who you were. Not from me." Before he could respond, she disappeared into the building. Elliot sat in the cockpit for a long moment, staring at the city lights. Then he powered down the helicopter, climbed out, and made his way back to the helipad at Horizon Dynamics headquarters. As he walked through the empty building, pushing his mop cart down the silent hallways, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed life was about to come apart. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if that terrified him or gave him hope. The black tuxedo arrived at Elliot's apartment the next afternoon in a sleek garment bag with the Horizon Dynamics logo embossed in silver. He stared at it for a long moment, hanging on the back of his bedroom door, before his son's voice pulled him back to reality. "Dad, is that for the fancy party?" Elliot turned to see his 7-year-old son, Owen, standing in the doorway with wide eyes. The boy had his mother's curly hair and her bright, curious smile. He clutched a half-eaten sandwich in one hand and a toy helicopter in the other. "Yeah, buddy. It's for work. But you clean buildings. Why do you need a fancy suit for that?" Elliot crouched down to his son's level. "My boss asked me to go to an event. It's just for one night." Owen's face lit up. "Are you going to fly again? Like you used to?" Elliot's chest tightened. Owen had been only 2 when everything fell apart. When Sarah died, and the sky became a place Elliot couldn't bear to return to. But the boy remembered the stories. He'd heard them from his grandmother, from old photos, from the faded flight jacket that still hung in the back of Elliot's closet. "Maybe," Elliot said softly. "We'll see." Owen threw his arms around his father's neck. I hope you do. Mom would want you to. Elliot held him tight, blinking back the sting in his eyes. I know she would. That evening, after dropping Owen off at his neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, Elliot stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the bow tie that had taken him 3 YouTube videos to figure out. The tuxedo fit perfectly, too perfectly. It made him look like someone he used to be. He grabbed his keys and headed out, the city lights blurring past his windshield as he drove his old pickup truck across town toward the Grand Meridian Hotel, where the gala was being held. The Grand Meridian rose 30 stories above the waterfront, all glass and gold trim, its entrance flanked by valets in crisp white uniforms. Elliot pulled up, feeling distinctly out of place as a valet opened his door and took his keys without a second glance at the rust spots on his truck's bumper. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while servers glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Elliot stood near the entrance, scanning the room. He felt like an imposter. There you are. He turned to find Orlith walking toward him, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. She wore a midnight blue gown that caught the light with every step, her dark hair cascading over one shoulder. She looked like she belonged in this world of wealth and power. You clean up well, Mr. Carter, she said with a slight smile. You too, Miss Danvar. She laughed. I think, under the circumstances, you can call me Orlith. Elliot. I know. She gestured toward the crowd. Come on, there are some people I want you to meet. Before he could protest, she linked her arm through his and led him into the throng. For the next hour, Elliot was introduced to more millionaires, tech moguls, and philanthropists than he could count. Orlith introduced him simply as the best pilot I've ever flown with, and each time, he saw the curiosity flash in people's eyes. They wanted to know his story. Where he'd trained. What companies he'd worked for. Elliot deflected with vague answers, but Orlith watched him carefully, piecing together the puzzle with every word he didn't say. Eventually, they found themselves on the balcony overlooking the bay. The noise of the party faded behind them, replaced by the gentle sound of waves against the dock below. You don't like crowds, Orlith observed, leaning against the railing. Not particularly. Then why did you come? You didn't give me much choice. She smiled. Fair point. She paused, studying him. You're good at deflecting questions. You know. But you can't do it forever. Elliot sighed, looking out at the water. What do you want to know? Everything. But I'll settle for the truth about why you stopped flying. He was quiet for a long time. The wind carried the scent of salt and distant rain. Finally, he spoke. Her name was Sarah. We met when I was flying medevac missions off the Aleutian Islands. She was a nurse, stationed on one of the platforms. Toughest person I ever met. His voice softened. We got married, had a son. Life was good. Better than good. Orlith stayed silent, sensing there was more. 5 years ago, there was an accident. Rig explosion. I was in the air when the call came through. By the time I got there, the whole platform was ablaze. I pulled out 12 people that day. 12 lives saved. His hands gripped the railing. But Sarah was treating someone in the lower med bay when the blast happened. They never made it out. Orlith's breath caught. Elliot, I'm so sorry. I kept flying for a while after that, tried to push through. But every time I got in the cockpit, all I could think about was that I was in the sky while she burned, that I saved strangers and lost her. He shook his head. So I walked away, sold everything, moved here with Owen, my son, started over where no one knew who I was, and became a janitor. Yeah, simple work, quiet, no lives depending on me, no one to lose. He looked at her. Until yesterday, I hadn't flown in 4 years. Orlith reached out and placed her hand over his. And how did it feel? Elliot closed his eyes. Like coming home, and like betraying her all at once. She wouldn't want you to give up something you love. You didn't know her. No, but I know what it's like to build walls around yourself. To hide who you really are because showing it hurts too much. She squeezed his hand. You can't live like that forever, Elliot. Trust me. I've tried. Before he could respond, a voice called from the doorway. Orlith, there you are. The mayor wants to speak with you about the waterfront initiative. She sighed and pulled her hand back. Duty calls. But this conversation isn't over. As she walked away, Elliot stayed on the balcony, staring out at the dark water. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. A door he'd kept locked was starting to open. He just wasn't sure he was ready for what lay beyond it. The gala ended near midnight, but Orlith insisted on giving Elliot a ride home. Her driver navigated the quiet streets of Crescent Bay while they sat in the back of her black sedan, the city lights painting streaks across the windows. You live in Harborview District? Orlith asked, glancing at the address Elliot had given the driver. Yeah, it's affordable, close to Owen's school. Owen, that's your son? Elliot nodded. He's 7. Smart as hell. Obsessed with helicopters, ironically. Orlith smiled. He gets that from you. His mother, actually. She used to take him up to the observation deck at the hospital where she worked. They'd watch the medevac birds come and go. He was too young to remember much of her, but he remembers that. The car pulled up in front of a modest apartment building, 4 stories of weathered brick with a corner market on the ground floor. It was a far cry from Orlith's penthouse, but Elliot had never seemed to notice or care. Thanks for the ride, he said, reaching for the door handle. Wait. Orlith pulled out her phone. Give me your number. He raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I'm not done with you yet. And because I have a proposition. That sounds ominous. She smiled. It's not. I promise. Just give me your number, and I'll explain tomorrow. Elliot hesitated, then rattled off his digits. Orlith typed them in and immediately sent him a text so he'd have hers. Good night, Elliot. Night. He climbed out and watched the sedan pull away, disappearing into the night. Then he headed upstairs, where Mrs. Chen handed over a sleeping Owen with a knowing smile. Big night? She asked. Something like that. He carried his son to bed, tucking him in and kissing his forehead. Owen stirred slightly, mumbling something about helicopters before settling back into sleep. Elliot sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. This was his world now. Small, safe, predictable. No risks, no heights to fall from. But standing on that balcony with Orlith, he'd felt something he hadn't in years. Possibility. The next morning, Elliot was back in his gray jumpsuit, mopping the executive floor of Horizon Dynamics, when his phone buzzed. A text from Orlith. My office. 10 a.m. Don't make me send security. He shook his head, smiling despite himself, and made his way to the top floor. Orlith's office was massive, all floor-to-ceiling windows, with a view that stretched from the bay to the mountains beyond. She sat behind a desk made of black marble and steel, typing furiously on her laptop. When she saw him enter, she gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Elliot sat, feeling once again like he didn't belong in this world of polished surfaces and expensive art. Orlith closed her laptop and leaned forward. I have a problem. Okay, I'm expanding operations, opening a new research facility in the Sierra Blanca Mountains. Remote location. Difficult terrain. The only way to transport equipment and personnel efficiently is by helicopter. Elliot could see where this was going. You want me to fly? I want you to run the entire aviation operation. Head pilot, fleet manager, training supervisor, the works. He stared at her. You're joking. I don't joke about business, Elliot. You're the most talented pilot I've ever seen. You know rescue operations. You know high-altitude flying. You know difficult terrain. And more than that, you have something most pilots don't. What's that? You care. You don't fly because it's a job. You fly because it's who you are. She slid a folder across the desk. I'm offering you a 5-year contract. Salary of $200,000 a year, full benefits, housing allowance, education fund for Owen. Elliot opened the folder, his eyes scanning the numbers. It was more money than he'd seen in years. Enough to give Owen the life Sarah had wanted for him. Enough to stop living in survival mode. But it also meant returning to the sky. Fully. Completely. I don't know if I can, he said quietly. Why not? Because the last time I flew for a living, I lost everything. What if I can't do it anymore? What if I freeze up when it matters? Orlith stood and walked around the desk, leaning against it in front of him. You didn't freeze yesterday. You flew better than any pilot I've ever hired. And you know why? Because flying isn't just a skill for you. It's instinct. It's in your bones. That doesn't mean I'm ready. Then get ready. Take a week. Think about it. Talk to Owen. But Elliot, she met his eyes. Her voice firm. Don't let fear steal the rest of your life. Sarah wouldn't want that. He looked down at the contract, his hands trembling slightly. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why do you care? You barely know me. Orlith was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. Because I know what it's like to lose everything and rebuild from scratch. When I was 23, I had nothing. No family, no money, no connections. Just a business degree and a chip on my shoulder. I built Horizon Dynamics from a single office and a dream. And along the way, I lost people too. Friends, partners, people I loved. She crossed her arms. But I learned something. Hiding from the past doesn't heal it. Moving forward does. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is help someone else move forward too. Elliot stared at her, seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just a billionaire CEO. She was someone who understood loss. Who understood survival. I'll think about it, he said finally. That's all I ask. As he stood to leave, she called after him. And Elliot, you're not mopping floors anymore. Effective immediately. You're on administrative leave. Full pay. Take the week. Be with Owen. Figure out what you want. He nodded, unable to find words, and walked out. That evening, after picking Owen up from school, Elliot took him to the pier. They sat on the edge, legs dangling over the water, eating ice cream and watching the boats drift by. Dad? Owen asked, chocolate smeared across his chin. Yeah, buddy. Are you happy? The question hit Elliot harder than he expected. What makes you ask that? Owen shrugged. You always look sad, like you're thinking about Mom. Elliot's throat tightened. I think about her every day. Me too. But I think she'd want us to be happy, even without her. Elliot pulled his son close, resting his chin on top of his head. You're pretty smart for 7. I know. They sat in silence, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. And for the first time in years, Elliot allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by loss. Maybe Owen was right. Maybe Sarah would want them to be happy. Maybe it was time to fly again. 3 days later, Elliot stood outside Orlith's office, with the signed contract in his hand. He'd barely slept since their conversation, his mind cycling through every possible outcome, every fear, every hope. But in the end, it was Owen who'd made the decision easy. If you don't fly, Dad, you'll always be sad, the boy had said with the blunt honesty only young ones possess. And I don't want you to be sad anymore. So, here he was, about to step back into the life he'd abandoned. Orlith looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. Then she saw the folder in his hand, and a slow smile spread across her face. Welcome back to the sky, Elliot Carter. He set the contract on her desk. I have conditions. Name them. I need flexible hours. Owen comes first. School events, sick days, whatever he needs. I won't miss his life because I'm chasing altitude. Done. And I want final say on safety protocols. If I think a flight is too dangerous, we don't fly. No arguments. Agreed. Anything else? Yeah. If I screw this up, if I freeze or fail, you fire me immediately. No second chances. I won't put anyone at risk because of my issues. Orlith stood and extended her hand. You have a deal. But for the record, I don't think you're going to screw this up. They shook, and Elliot felt the weight of 4 years lift slightly from his shoulders. Over the next 2 weeks, Elliot threw himself into preparation. Orlith arranged for him to get recertified, sending him to a private flight school where he logged hours in simulators and real aircraft. His instructors were impressed by how quickly everything came back, like riding a bike, but with rotor blades and jet fuel. He also spent time at the Horizon Dynamics hangar, inspecting the fleet Orlith was assembling for the Sierra Blanca project. 3 helicopters, Bell 429 seconds, and an Airbus H-145 for heavy transport, all top-of-the-line equipment. During one of these inspections, he met the rest of the team. There was Rodriguez, a young mechanic with a gift for diagnostics. Ava, a logistics coordinator who ran operations like a military campaign. And then there was someone from his past he never expected to see again. Carter? Elliot Carter? Elliot turned to find a man in a flight suit striding toward him, disbelief written across his weathered face. Jack Brennan, Elliot said slowly, recognizing the pilot he'd flown with years ago on the Aleutian runs. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. Last I heard, you disappeared after Sarah. No one knew where you went. The 2 men clasped hands, years of unspoken history passing between them. I needed to step away, Elliot said simply. I get it, man. That was rough. We all felt it. Jack glanced around the hangar. But you're flying again. For Horizon. Starting to. Orlith Danavar hired me to run the aviation division for a new project. Jack let out a low whistle. Danavar herself. Huh. That's big time. She doesn't hire just anyone. So I'm learning. They spent the next hour catching up, Jack filling him in on the years Elliot had missed, who'd retired, who'd moved on, who was still flying the dangerous routes up north. And then, Jack mentioned something that made Elliot's blood run cold. You hear about Colton Voss? Elliot's jaw tightened. What about him? He's working for Pegasus Transport now. Big contracts all over the West Coast. Still as reckless as ever. Jack shook his head. I heard he's been undercutting bids left and right, trying to squeeze out competition. Real cutthroat stuff. Elliot's hands clenched into fists. Colton Voss. The pilot, whose negligence had contributed to the rig explosion that killed Sarah. The investigation had cleared him technically, but Elliot knew the truth. Voss had ignored safety protocols, rushed a fuel delivery, and sparked the chain reaction that ended in disaster. He's still flying? Elliot asked, his voice tight. Yeah. Why? You're not thinking of going after him, are you? No. Just curious. But Jack knew him too well. Elliot, whatever you're thinking, don't. Voss isn't worth it, and you've got too much to lose now. Elliot nodded, but the seed of anger had been planted. That evening, Orlith called him to her penthouse. When he arrived, she handed him a glass of wine and led him to the balcony overlooking the city. I heard Jack Brennan recognized you today, she said. Word travels fast. It does in this industry. He spoke highly of you. Said you were one of the best rescue pilots he'd ever worked with. Jack's biased. We go way back. Orlith leaned against the railing. He also mentioned Colton Voss. Said you two have history. Elliot's expression darkened. Did he? Elliot, if there's something I need to know, tell me now. Voss has been trying to undercut my contracts for months. If there's bad blood between you two, it could complicate things. He drained his wine glass, staring out at the lights. Voss was responsible for the accident that killed Sarah. Not officially, but I was there. I know what happened. He cut corners, ignored warnings, and people died because of it. Orlith's expression softened. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No one does. The investigation buried it. He had connections, lawyers, people protecting him, and I was too broken to fight it. And now I just want to do my job and stay away from him. But even as he said it, both of them knew it wouldn't be that simple. A week later, Elliot's worst fears were confirmed. Orlith called an emergency meeting, her face grim. Pegasus Transport just submitted a bid for the Sierra Blanca supply contract. They're undercutting us by 30%. Elliot's stomach dropped. Who's their lead pilot? Orlith met his eyes. Colton Voss. The room fell silent. Ava and Rodriguez exchanged worried glances. Jack Brennan cursed under his breath. We can't let him get that contract, Elliot said, his voice hard. Not because of me. Because he's dangerous. People will get hurt. Then we outbid him, Orlith said. And we prove we're the better choice. How? She smiled, a fierce competitive glint in her eyes. By doing what we do best. We fly better, faster, and safer than anyone else. And we start by showing the Sierra Blanca project investors exactly what we're capable of. Elliot nodded. When? Tomorrow. There's a demonstration flight scheduled. Difficult terrain. High altitude. Simulated rescue operation. I want you flying lead. I'll be ready. But as the meeting dispersed, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that Colton Voss's reappearance was more than just bad timing. It was a reckoning years in the making. And this time, he wasn't going to walk away. The morning of the demonstration flight arrived with gray skies and turbulent winds. Elliot stood on the helipad at Crescent Bay Regional Airport, watching clouds roll in from the Pacific. Beside him, the Bell 429 gleamed under the hangar lights, prepped and ready. Orlith approached with a group of investors, their expensive suits and designer shoes incongruous against the industrial backdrop of the tarmac. Among them was a stern-faced woman named Victoria Langford, head of the Sierra Blanca Development Commission. She would decide which company got the contract. Miss Langford, Orlith said smoothly, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. I promise you won't be disappointed. Victoria's expression remained neutral. I've seen a lot of demonstrations, Miss Danavar. Pegasus Transport put on quite a show yesterday. Your team will need to exceed expectations. We intend to. Elliot performed his pre-flight check with meticulous care, aware of the eyes watching his every move. Jack Brennan would be flying the support helicopter while Elliot handled the primary demonstration. The flight plan called for high-altitude maneuvering, precision landing on a narrow mountain ridge, and a simulated rescue extraction. As Elliot climbed into the cockpit, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Good luck today, Carter. You're going to need it. He knew immediately who it was. Colton Voss. Elliot deleted the message and focused on his instruments. The rotors spun to life, and within minutes, he was airborne. The helicopter responded beautifully, cutting through the wind with power and grace. Elliot guided them east toward the mountain range, Orlith sitting beside him in the co-pilot's seat, her presence both steadying and distracting. You've got this, she said through the headset. I know. The mountains rose ahead, their peaks shrouded in mist. Elliot increased altitude, compensating for the thinning air and unpredictable crosswinds. The designated landing zone was a rocky outcrop barely wider than the helicopter's skid span, a test of precision and nerve. Through the headset, he heard Jack's voice. Lead, you've got a wind shear developing at your 2 o'clock. Recommend adjusting approach angle. Copy that. Adjusting. Elliot tilted the cyclic slightly, reading the wind like a language only pilots understood. The helicopter descended smoothly, the skids kissing the rock with barely a tremor. Below, through the cockpit glass, Victoria Langford and the other investors watched from the observation point, their faces registering genuine surprise. Phase 1 complete, Elliot announced. Beginning rescue simulation. Jack's helicopter hovered nearby, lowering a dummy payload on a winch line. Elliot had to maintain perfect stability, while Jack's downdraft created turbulence. It was like threading a needle in a hurricane. His hands moved with instinctive precision, micro-adjustments keeping the aircraft steady. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his breathing remained calm. This was what he was born to do. Payload secured. Jack confirmed. Extraction complete. That was textbook. Carter. Elliot allowed himself a small smile. Thanks, Brennan. Heading back to base. The return flight was smooth until they were 5 minutes from landing. Orlith's phone rang. She answered, her expression darkening as she listened. What is it? Elliot asked. She covered the phone. There's been an incident. A Pegasus transport helicopter went down in Sierra Blanca foothills. Crew of 3. Pilot is Colton Voss. Elliot's blood went cold. Are they alive? Unknown. Search and rescue is scrambling, but they're 30 minutes out. Weather's getting worse. Their eyes met. Elliot knew what she was asking before she said it. We're 15 minutes away, he said. And we've got the equipment. Orlith nodded and spoke into the phone. Tell them we're responding. She looked at Elliot. You don't have to do this. Not for him. It's not for him. It's for whoever else is on that bird. Elliot changed course, pushing the helicopter toward the mountains. Jack followed without question. The investors would have to wait. Lives were on the line. The crash site was chaos. Elliot spotted the wreckage from 2 miles out. A twisted mass of metal and carbon fiber wedged against a granite slope. Smoke rose in thin tendrils, dissipating in the mountain wind. The Pegasus helicopter had clipped a ridge during landing, its tail rotor sheared clean off. I've got visual, Elliot reported over the emergency frequency. Setting down on the nearest stable ground. The terrain was treacherous, all loose rock and steep angles. Elliot found a relatively flat area 50 yards from the wreck and brought the Bell 429 down with agonizing care. The moment the skids touched Earth, he powered down to idle and grabbed the emergency medical kit. Stay here, he told Orlith. Not a chance. They scrambled across the rocky slope together, Jack right behind them with additional equipment. As they reached the wreckage, Elliot's training kicked in. He assessed the scene with clinical efficiency. The cockpit was crushed on one side. Through the shattered windscreen, he could see 2 figures. The co-pilot was unconscious, but breathing, strapped in his seat. In the pilot's seat, bloodied and barely conscious, was Colton Voss. Their eyes met. Voss's face was pale, his breathing labored. Carter, he whispered, you came. Shut up and don't move, Elliot said, his voice cold. You might have spinal damage. Jack worked on extracting the co-pilot while Elliot examined Voss. Broken ribs, definitely. Possible internal bleeding. His left leg was pinned under twisted metal. There's a 3rd crew member, Voss gasped. Mechanic. Threw him clear before impact. Down the slope. Orlith was already moving. I'll find him. Elliot worked quickly, stabilizing Voss's neck with a brace from the medical kit. The man who'd cost him everything was now completely dependent on him. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. I'm sorry, Voss said suddenly. About Sarah. About everything. I was reckless. I knew it then. I know it now. Elliot's hands paused for just a moment. 4 years of anger, of grief, of blame, all focused on this broken man. He could walk away. Let rescue services handle it when they arrived. No one would question him. But Owen's voice echoed in his mind. I don't want you to be sad anymore, Dad. And Sarah's voice, a memory from long ago. We save people, Elliot. That's who we are. He resumed working, his movements precise. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I'm getting you out of here. It took 20 minutes to free Voss's leg using hydraulic cutters from Jack's emergency kit. By the time they had him on a stretcher, Orlith had returned with the 3rd crew member, a young mechanic with a broken arm but otherwise stable. Official rescue is 10 minutes out, she reported. But the weather's closing in fast. If we don't leave now, we'll all be stuck here. Elliot looked at the sky. Dark clouds were rolling in, heavy with rain and turbulence. They had one shot at this. Load everyone into my bird, he ordered. Jack You fly solo back. I'll take the wounded. That's overcapacity, Jack warned. In this weather, with that much weight, I can handle it. Jack nodded, trusting his friend's judgment. They secured all 3 injured crew members in the passenger bay. Orlith strapped herself in beside them, ready to provide medical support during the flight. Elliot climbed into the pilot's seat, his hands finding the controls like old friends. The engines roared to life. He pulled on the collective, and the overloaded helicopter lifted sluggishly. The wind immediately grabbed them, trying to slam them back into the mountainside. Elliot fought it, every muscle in his body engaged in the battle for control. Rain began to pelt the windscreen. Visibility dropped to near zero. Elliot. Orlith's voice came through the headset, tight with fear. We're losing altitude. I know. Hold on. He pushed the helicopter forward, using momentum to gain clearance from the mountain. The engines screamed in protest. Warning lights flickered across the instrument panel. And then, like a curtain lifting, they broke through the cloud layer. Clear sky opened above them, and Elliot guided the struggling aircraft toward lower altitude where the air was thicker, the flight easier. We're clear, he announced, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 20 minutes to Crescent Bay Medical Center. In the passenger bay, Voss had lost consciousness. The co-pilot was stable. The mechanic was talking to Orlith, asking if they were going to make it. Yes, she said, glancing at Elliot with something like awe. We're going to make it. The landing pad at Crescent Bay Medical Center was flooded with emergency personnel when Elliot touched down. The moment the skids hit concrete, the doors flew open. Paramedics rushed in, extracting the injured crew with practiced efficiency. Elliot remained in the cockpit, hands still gripping the controls, as the adrenaline drained from his system. He'd done it, brought everyone back alive. Even Colton Voss. Orlith appeared at his door, her face smudged with dirt and rain but glowing with pride. That was the most incredible flying I've ever witnessed. Just doing the job. No, that was more than a job. That was heroism. Before he could respond, Victoria Langford appeared behind Orlith, accompanied by the other investors. Her severe expression had transformed into something resembling respect. Mr. Carter, she said formally, I've been evaluating helicopter operations for 15 years. What you just did, overloaded aircraft, deteriorating weather, impossible terrain, that's not just skill, that's mastery. She turned to Orlith. Miss Danvar, Horizon Dynamics has the contract. No one else comes close. Orlith's face broke into a triumphant smile. Thank you, Victoria. You won't regret this. Over the next few days, news of the rescue spread. Local media picked up the story. Billionaire CEO's pilot saves rival crew in daring mountain rescue. Elliot's face appeared on screens across the city. His past, as an elite rescue pilot, suddenly public knowledge. Owen saw the coverage at school. When Elliot picked him up that afternoon, the boy's face was radiant with pride. Everyone knows you're a hero, Dad, Owen said, bouncing in his seat. My teacher said you saved 3 lives. Just did what needed doing, buddy. Mom would be so proud. Elliot pulled over, his eyes stinging. He unbuckled and pulled Owen into a fierce hug. Yeah, she would. 2 weeks later, Colton Voss was released from the hospital. To Elliot's surprise, the man showed up at the Horizon Dynamics hangar, walking with a cane but alive. Carter, Voss said, his voice humble in a way Elliot had never heard. I owe you my life, and I owe you the truth. They sat on a bench outside the hangar while Voss explained everything. The shortcuts he'd taken, the warnings he'd ignored, the guilt he'd carried for 5 years. I can't undo what happened to Sarah, Voss said, but I'm done flying. I'm testifying to the aviation board about what really happened that day. It won't bring her back, but maybe it'll prevent another accident. Elliot stared at the sky, processing. Forgiveness felt impossible, but so had flying again, so had living again. Thank you, he said finally, for telling the truth. Voss nodded and walked away, leaving Elliot alone with his thoughts. That evening, Orlith found him on the Horizon Dynamics rooftop, the same place where this had all begun. "Heard Voss came by," she said, sitting beside him. "Yeah, he's confessing everything, giving up his license. How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I don't know. It doesn't change what happened, but maybe it means something." Orlith reached over and took his hand. "You know what I think? I think Sarah would be proud of you. Not just for saving Voss, but for living again. For being Owen's father. For being the man you are." Elliot looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a billionaire CEO, but a woman who'd refused to let him stay lost. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything. For believing I could fly again when I didn't believe it myself. You always could. You just needed a reason. And what's my reason now?" She smiled. "Maybe you'll figure that out." 6 months later, the Sierra Blanca research facility was fully operational. Elliot's aviation division ran like clockwork: transport flights, supply runs, emergency evacuations. He'd built a team he trusted, trained pilots who shared his commitment to safety and excellence. But more importantly, he'd built a life. Owen thrived in his new school, funded by Elliot's salary. The boy had friends, confidence, and a father who showed up to every soccer game and school play. On weekends, Elliot took him flying, teaching him about helicopters and weather and the endless possibility of the sky. And there was Orlith. What had started as a professional relationship had deepened into something neither of them had expected. She still ran her empire with fierce determination, but now she made time for quiet dinners, for walks along the waterfront, for laughter that had nothing to do with business. One evening, as the sun set over Crescent Bay, Elliot took her back to the Horizon Dynamics rooftop. The Bell 429 sat waiting, polished and ready. "What's this?" Orlith asked, curious. "Remember what you said that first day, about marrying me if I could fly?" She laughed. "You're not holding me to that." "No. But I am holding you to something else." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple diamond ring. "Orlith Danavar, you saved my life by giving me a reason to live it. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You're serious? Completely? Then yes. Absolutely yes." They kissed as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson, the city spreading out below them like a promise. A month later, they were married on that same rooftop, with Owen as the ring bearer and Jack Brennan as best man. The ceremony was small, intimate. Just the people who mattered most. As they exchanged vows, a helicopter flew overhead, a tribute arranged by Elliot's team. Its rotors caught the light, and for a moment, the sound transported Elliot back to every flight he'd ever taken, every life he'd saved, every moment he'd thought was lost forever. Owen tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, look." The boy pointed to the sky, where the helicopter had traced a heart shape with its contrails before flying off into the distance. Orlith squeezed Elliot's hand. "Think that's a sign?" "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think Sarah's telling us she's happy." That night, after the celebration ended and Owen was asleep in his new room in Orlith's penthouse, Elliot stood on the balcony. Orlith joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "No regrets?" she asked. "Not one. Even about mopping floors?" He laughed. "That led me here. So no, not even that." She rested her head against his back. "What do you think happens next?" "I don't know, but I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Above them, stars emerged one by one, piercing the darkening sky. And Elliot Carter, once lost, once broken, once convinced his story had ended, realized that some endings are just beginnings in disguise. The sky hadn't forgotten him. It had been waiting. And now, finally, he was home. 2 years had passed since that rooftop wedding, and the world had transformed in ways Elliot Carter never could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their home, a custom-built residence perched on the cliffs overlooking Crescent Bay. It wasn't as ostentatious as Orlith's old penthouse, but it was theirs, a perfect blend of her refined taste and his need for open skies. Elliot stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Owen sat at the counter, sketching in a notebook. The boy was 9 now, taller, more confident, but still obsessed with helicopters. His drawings had evolved from crude stick figures to surprisingly detailed technical diagrams. "Dad, do you think I could start flight lessons soon?" Owen asked, not looking up from his sketch. "You're 9, buddy. Give it a few more years. But you started when you were 18. That's like forever from now." Elliot smiled, sliding a pancake onto Owen's plate. "Tell you what, when you're 12, we'll start ground school. Theory, weather, navigation. By the time you're old enough to actually fly, you'll know more than most licensed pilots." Owen's face lit up. "Really? You promise?" "I promise." Orlith emerged from the bedroom, already dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair pulled back in her signature style. But there was something softer about her now, a lightness that hadn't been there before. She kissed Elliot's cheek and ruffled Owen's hair before pouring herself coffee. "Big day today," she announced. "The board meeting about the international expansion. Are you still planning to fly Senator Michaels to the Sierra Blanca site this afternoon?" "Yeah. 3 p.m. departure. Jack's handling the morning supply run, so I'm clear until then." "Good. Because I need you at the meeting this morning. They want to hear directly from you about the safety protocols for the new fleet." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Since when do I attend board meetings?" "Since you became the most respected name in civilian helicopter operations on the West Coast. Your word carries weight, Elliot. These investors need to hear from you." He sighed, but nodded. 2 years ago, he would have refused, would have hidden behind his mop and his anonymity. But that man was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that running from the past only delayed the future. An hour later, Elliot stood before a conference room full of executives and investors, his hands steady as he presented the comprehensive safety framework he'd developed for Horizon Dynamics' aviation division. Charts and statistics filled the screens behind him, but his words carried more power than any data. "Safety isn't just about equipment or protocols," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "It's about culture. It's about building a team that understands. Every flight carries lives, dreams, futures." In the 2 years since we launched this division, we've flown over 15,000 missions, medical transports, supply runs, emergency evacuations, and we've maintained a perfect safety record. Not because we're lucky, but because we never compromise. The room was silent. Then, Victoria Langford, now a permanent member of the advisory board, began to applaud. Others joined, and Elliot felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with purpose. After the meeting, Orlith found him on the executive floor balcony, the same spot where they'd shared so many conversations. "You were incredible in there," she said, leaning against the railing beside him. "I just told the truth." "No. You inspired people. There's a difference." She paused, then reached into her jacket pocket. "I have something for you." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded, showing a young woman in medical scrubs standing beside a helicopter. She was laughing, her hair whipping in the rotor wash, her eyes bright with life. "Where did you find this?" Elliot whispered, his throat tight. "Owen found it in one of your old boxes. He asked me if he could frame it for you. Said he wanted you to remember her smile, not just her absence." Elliot stared at Sarah's face, and for the first time in years, the memory didn't bring crushing pain. Instead, he felt gratitude. Gratitude for the time they'd had, for the son she'd given him, for the lessons her loss had taught him about what truly mattered. "He's wise beyond his years," Elliot said softly. "He gets that from both his parents." That afternoon, Elliot flew Senator Michaels to the Sierra Blanca research facility. The flight was smooth, the conversation engaging. The senator was impressed by the operation, by the precision and professionalism of Elliot's team. As they prepared to land, the senator asked, "Mr. Carter, I've heard your story. The tragedy, the comeback. What would you say to someone who's lost everything and doesn't see a way forward?" Elliot considered the question as he guided the helicopter down to the landing pad. "I'd tell them that the sky always forgives. That hitting bottom isn't the end. It's just the lowest point before you start climbing again. And I'd tell them that sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're billionaire CEOs who see past the janitor's uniform. Sometimes they're 7-year-old boys who remind us what we're living for." The senator smiled. "That's beautiful and true." After dropping off his passenger, Elliot took the long route home, flying along the coastline as the sun began its descent. He thought about the past 2 years, about everything that had changed. The Horizon Dynamics Aviation Division had grown to employ 43 people. They'd rescued 17 hikers from the mountains, transported hundreds of medical patients, and never lost a single life under his watch. His team respected him. His family loved him. And every morning, he woke up with purpose. But more than any of that, he'd learned to forgive himself. When he landed at the private pad behind their home, Owen was waiting on the lawn with a soccer ball, exactly as he did every evening. It was their ritual, 30 minutes of playing before dinner, just father and son. "Ready to lose, old man?" Owen called out, grinning. "Keep dreaming, kiddo." They played until the sun touched the horizon, their laughter echoing across the cliffs. Orlith watched from the deck, her laptop abandoned, her empire on hold for these precious moments. Later, after Owen was in bed and the house was quiet, Elliot and Orlith sat on their balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching stars emerge one by one. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Orlith asked. "When you stepped forward and said you could fly?" "All the time." "What made you do it? You'd stayed hidden for so long. What changed?" Elliot thought about it, remembering the moment with perfect clarity. "I heard you say you needed a pilot, and something in me just couldn't let the opportunity pass. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fate, or maybe I was just tired of being invisible. Well, I'm glad you stepped forward. My life would be so much emptier without you." He pulled her closer. "Mine too. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." They sat in comfortable silence, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below providing a steady rhythm. Elliot's phone buzzed with a message from Jack Brennan, a photo of the team at the hangar, with a caption, "Best crew in the business, thanks to the best boss." Elliot smiled and showed it to Orlith. "You know, I spent 4 years thinking my story was over, that the best parts of my life were behind me. And now I realize it was just intermission. The second act is turning out pretty damn good." Orlith laughed, that genuine, unguarded laugh he'd fallen in love with. "Pretty damn good? That's the most romantic thing you've ever said. Give me a break. I'm a pilot, not a poet." "No," she said, turning to face him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "You're a hero. Owen's hero, my hero, and the hero of every person you've saved or will save. I'm just a guy who flies helicopters. You're so much more than that. You're proof that broken things can be whole again, that lost people can find their way home, that love gets second chances." Elliot kissed her forehead, his heart full in a way he'd thought impossible. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing who I could be when I couldn't see it myself. Someone once told me that hiding from the past doesn't heal it. Moving forward does." She smiled. Smart person. Whoever said that must have been a billionaire CEO or something. They laughed together, and in that moment, Elliot understood something profound. Healing wasn't about forgetting the pain or erasing the scars. It was about building something beautiful despite them, maybe even because of them. Sarah would always be part of his story. Her loss had shaped him, taught him, deepened him, but that chapter had ended. and new ones had begun. Chapters filled with Owen's laughter, Orlith's love, and skies that stretched endlessly ahead. The next morning, Elliot woke before dawn, as he always did. He walked out to the balcony and watched the sun rise over Crescent Bay, painting the sky in shades of hope. Somewhere below, his helicopters sat waiting in the hangar. His team would arrive soon. Missions would be planned, lives would be saved, and through it all, he would fly. Not because he had to, not because he was running from something or trying to prove anything, but because the sky was where he belonged, where he'd always belonged. Owen's voice drifted from inside the house. "Dad, can we have waffles today?" "Sure thing, buddy." As Elliot turned to go inside, a single helicopter appeared on the horizon, its rotors catching the morning light. He watched it for a moment, remembering every flight that had brought him to this moment, every rescue, every failure, every second chance. The janitor with grease on his hands was gone. In his place stood a man who'd learned that sometimes you have to hit the ground before you remember how to fly. And when you finally do, when you spread your wings again after years of being earthbound, the sky doesn't judge. It doesn't ask where you've been or why you stayed away. It simply welcomes you home. Because the sky always remembers. And it always forgives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.